The first thing I noticed was the sound. A slow, steady beeping somewhere to my right. Each note pricking the fog in my mind. Then came the sharp scent of antiseptic, the dry pull of oxygen against my nose, and the heavy weight in my chest when I tried to take a full breath. My eyes opened to a white ceiling, too bright, too clean, and I knew I wasn't at home. A nurse leaned over me, her voice calm but edged with relief. "Mrs. Ashford, you're awake." She adjusted something on the monitor and asked me my name, the year, the day. My answers came slow, my mouth dry, my throat tight. She said I'd been brought in unconscious 3 hours earlier after a neighbor found me collapsed in my kitchen. It took another beat before the question formed. My daughter. Did someone call her? The nurse's eyes softened in a way that made my stomach drop. Yes. The doctors spoke with her when you were admitted. I waited for the rest. For her to say Cambria had been here, that she'd sat at my side, held my hand, demanded to know what was being done for me. Instead, the nurse hesitated, then said, she told them she couldn't come. She was walking her mother-in-law's dog. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. The oxygen hissed softly in my ears. The monitor kept its patient rhythm, and the words settled like stones in my chest. The nurse went on, her voice lower now. They told her your condition was critical, that you might not make it through the night. She still declined. I turned my face toward the ceiling again, the light blurring as my eyes stung. The details of how I'd ended up here, the tightening in my throat earlier that day. The dizziness floated in fragments. But her words were sharp and clear. I couldn't seem to form another question. The nurse adjusted my blanket and said she'd give me a few minutes before the doctor came in. When she left, the silence wrapped around me. The beeping of the monitor felt louder now. Each pulse a reminder that I was here, breathing, while the one person I'd always believed would come for me hadn't. And as I lay there, staring at that blank white ceiling, the years that had led to this moment began to press forward in my mind. I raised Cambria in a small 2-bedroom apartment in Portland, Oregon, where every corner carried the imprint of our lives together. The walls knew the sound of her baby laughter. The floorboards had felt my tired steps after double shifts, and the kitchen had seen countless late nights spent making sure she had what she needed for school the next day. We never had much, but I made it stretch. Vacations were a luxury we couldn't afford, so summers were picnics in the park or camping in the living room with blankets strung between chairs. I turned down invitations to evenings out because babysitters cost too much, and I picked up extra shifts at the clinic to cover her music lessons. Every time I looked at her, I told myself it was worth it. When she met Daniel Hughes in her mid-20s, I was happy for her. He seemed steady, kind, from a well-off family. At first, Margot, his mother, was all gracious smiles and polite interest. She thanked me for raising such a capable young woman, and I wanted to believe it was sincere. But after the wedding, the balance began to shift. Plans Cambria and I made would be canceled at the last minute. Sorry. Mom Margot's hosting a family dinner tonight, and she really wants me there. Or I promised to help Margot with the charity auction prep. It happened once, then again, until it became normal. Holidays were suddenly rotated to the Hughes estate more often than to my place. Even my birthday brunch was cut short one year because Margot had called. Saying she needed Cambria to stop by, I told myself it was just newlywed enthusiasm, that she was building her life. I didn't want to be the mother who clung too tightly, so I swallowed the hurt and assured her it was fine. But sitting in that hospital bed now, those small cuts felt sharper. Each missed dinner, each sorry. Something came up had been leading to a truth I hadn't wanted to face, and then came the dog. Margot had a way of filling a room without raising her voice. At gatherings, she'd take Cambria's hand, guide her into the center of conversations, and praise her as if she were the crown jewel of the Hughes family. I'd watch from the side, smiling politely, while Margot slipped in little remarks that stuck to me long after the party ended. "Lorena's so independent," she'd say with an admiring tilt of her head. "She doesn't need anyone fussing over her." Isn't that wonderful? On the surface, it sounded like a compliment. Underneath, it was a quiet dismissal, a signal to everyone that I was fine to be left alone, that my presence didn't require the same consideration as hers. Cambria seemed to absorb these cues without noticing. The more Margot wove me into the background, the more my daughter began to treat me like a side character in her life. Holidays that had always been ours moved to the Hughes estate because it's easier for everyone. Social media filled with photos of her and Margot at charity luncheons, in matching aprons for holiday baking, posing on the Hughes' manicured lawn with captions like, "Family is everything." When we did see each other, conversations often began with updates about Margot, her garden, her book club, her latest volunteer project, and ended with Cambria glancing at her phone to check messages from her mother-in-law. It wasn't malicious. If anything, it was seamless, natural to her, as if she didn't realize the shift that had happened. I told myself it was a phase. Young couples often leaned on one side of the family more in the early years. I tried not to keep score, to let her find her balance without interference. But sometimes, driving home after another clipped visit, I'd grip the steering wheel tighter and wonder when I'd become the independent mother who didn't need her own daughter. I held on to the hope that the pendulum would swing back, that one day soon she'd remember where her roots were. Then Margot brought home the dog. Duke arrived in the Hughes household like royalty. Margot had flown to another state to collect him a purebred Samoyed with a price tag that could have covered my rent for months. His arrival was marked with a welcome home party, complete with matching monogrammed water bowls and a catered dog-friendly cake. Cambria's texts soon filled with photos of Duke sprawled on silk cushions, Duke in a custom-knit sweater, Duke asleep with his head in her lap. She called him her fur baby. And the more she said it, the more it felt like a title I could never compete with. Almost immediately, my time with her began to shrink. A Saturday coffee date turned into a quick takeout run because Duke can't be left alone for more than 2 hours. A Sunday dinner was cut short when she glanced at her watch and said, "I need to get back. Duke's bedtime routine is really important for his development." One afternoon, I was halfway through telling her about a staffing change at the clinic when she checked her phone and jumped up. "I have to go. Duke needs his evening walk." It was 3 in the afternoon. She kissed my cheek distractedly, grabbed her coat, and was gone before I'd even finished my sentence. I never told her the truth that Samoyed fur made my throat tighten and my chest ache. I'd known about my allergy for years, learned to manage it with medication and careful avoidance. But saying it out loud now felt like one more way to make her choose between me and the world she'd built with Margot. I'd spent too many years watching her choose the other side in smaller ways. I couldn't bring myself to hand her another reason, so I kept quiet, smiled through the itch in my eyes when Duke was nearby, and told myself it wasn't worth making a fuss until the night she invited me to dinner. When Cambria called to invite me to dinner at Margot's, I hesitated. It had been weeks since we'd had more than a hurried coffee together, and the invitation felt like a small olive branch. She said Margot was cooking a real family meal and wanted me there. I told myself it was a chance to bridge the growing gap, to remind her we could still share a table without anyone keeping score. The afternoon of the dinner, I lined up my allergy medication on the counter. 2 pills before leaving, one tucked in my purse for later. My condition had been stable lately, and I wasn't about to let a little discomfort derail what could be a step forward. I even picked up a bouquet of tulips, Margot's favorite, from the florist on my way over. Margot's house smelled of roasted garlic and fresh herbs when I walked in, the kind of scent that usually made me feel instantly welcome. Duke was sprawled across the plush living room rug, his thick white coat catching the light. His tail thumped lazily when he saw me, before I could say anything. Margot emerged from the kitchen, all smiles. "Lorena, you made it. And you brought flowers, how thoughtful." She took them from me, adding, "Duke's part of the family. You know, we couldn't possibly board him just for dinner." I nodded, swallowing the prickle already starting in my throat. "Of course," I said lightly, though my fingers itched for the purse where I'd stashed the extra pill. Cambria appeared then, wrapping me in a quick hug. "You look great. Mom, come on, let's sit. Dinner's almost ready." I settled onto the couch, careful to keep a bit of distance from Duke, who had padded over to sniff at my shoes. Within minutes, my eyes began to water, the skin at my neck tingling, but I stayed put, smiling when Margot offered wine, listening as Cambria chatted about a fundraiser she and her Emil were organizing. I told myself to focus on the conversation, to ignore the slow tightening in my chest. Leaving early would only reinforce the idea that I was difficult, that I couldn't blend into the life Cambria had chosen. I sipped my wine, steadying my breath, and waited for dinner to be served. By the third morning after that dinner, the tightness in my chest hadn't eased. I told myself it was just lingering irritation from the dog. Nothing I couldn't shake off. I had a full schedule at the clinic, and the thought of calling in sick made me feel weak. So I went in, keeping my inhaler close, pretending I wasn't counting the minutes between breaths. By noon, even walking from my desk to the break room left me lightheaded. Natalie, my coworker and friend, caught me leaning against the counter, trying to steady myself. "Lorena, you look awful. What's going on?" "It's fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just allergies acting up." She didn't buy it. "No, this isn't fine." She grabbed her keys. "I'm taking you to the ER." I tried to argue. But the truth was, the room was already tilting by the time we reached her car. My skin felt hot and tight, and each breath was a shallow pull. At the hospital, a nurse wheeled me straight into triage. I caught fragments of their conversation as they hooked me up to monitors words like anaphylaxis risk and critical response. A doctor asked if I'd had recent allergen exposure, and the image of Duke flashed in my mind. They tried calling Cambria. I heard the nurse's side of the conversation. "Your mother is in critical care." "Yes. Right now. I understand." But a pause. Then her voice cooled. "You're busy helping your mother-in-law with the dog's grooming appointment, ma'am. This is a life-threatening situation." Another pause. "I'll note your response." The call ended with a quiet click. The nurse didn't meet my eyes. And I didn't ask. I didn't need to hear the rest. Within minutes, they had me on oxygen, an IV dripping medication into my arm. Natalie stayed beside me, murmuring reassurances while the staff moved quickly around us. The monitors beeped steadily, but my pulse thundered in my ears. I wasn't thinking about the dog anymore. I was thinking about the dinner, the flowers I'd brought, the way I'd told myself I could handle it. And somewhere underneath all that, the first stirrings of something sharper than hurt began to take shape. When I woke again, the room was dim, the beeping of the monitor softer, almost lulling. Beside me, in the visitor's chair, sat Mrs. Delaney from down the hall, her hands folded over a small vase of daisies. "About time you opened those eyes," she said, her voice warm. "Thought I'd bring you a bit of sunshine." I tried to smile, but my throat was still raw. "How did you know I was here?" "One of the nurses called me when they couldn't reach family," she said simply. "Figured you shouldn't be alone." The nurse came in a moment later to check my vitals. She glanced at Mrs. Delaney, then at me, as if weighing whether to speak. "Your daughter was contacted," she said gently. "She was told you were in critical care. She said she couldn't come." I didn't ask why. I already knew the answer. There was always a reason, always something or someone else to tend to. Lying there, I felt the years fold over themselves in my mind, the holidays I'd spent waiting for her to arrive, the birthdays she'd cut short, the dinners canceled at the last minute, all the times I'd said, "It's fine," when it wasn't. All the times I'd let my place in her life shrink without protest. A cold clarity settled in my chest. I couldn't keep waiting for her to choose me. I couldn't keep pretending that the scraps she offered were enough. Something had to change. That night, while the ward was quiet and Mrs. Delaney had gone home, I stared at the blank notepad the nurse had left on my tray table. My hand hovered over the pen for a long time. If I was ever going to tell her the truth, it had to be now. The letter would be my last attempt and my first real boundary. The first words were the hardest. I sat propped up in bed, the hospital's thin blanket pulled over my legs, pen poised above the notepad. For years, I had rehearsed conversations in my head. Pleas, questions, quiet confrontations that never left my lips. But this time, I wasn't writing to convince her. I was writing to end the pretending. I began with the night I was admitted. I told her how the doctors had called, how they'd said it could be my last night, and how she had chosen not to come. From there, the memories came in a steady current. The birthdays left early, the plans abandoned for Margot's events, the way my presence had been treated as optional while her MIL's needs were treated as urgent. I kept my tone measured. No insults, no shouting in ink, just facts, laid out plainly. I told her I was stepping back, that I could no longer stay in a relationship where my needs and my health were so far down her list of priorities. I wrote that respect wasn't optional, and until she could show it consistently, I would keep my distance. There were moments when my hand shook, when I had to set the pen down and steady my breathing, but each time, I picked it up again, because this letter wasn't just for her, it was for me. By the time I reached the last page, my hand ached and my chest felt lighter. 4 pages of truth. 4 pages that I knew she might dismiss, twist, or ignore entirely. That didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I had finally said it. I folded the pages neatly, slid them into an envelope, and sealed it with a firm press of my thumb. I didn't write love in the closing line, not because I didn't feel it, but because this letter wasn't about softening the blow. It was about handing her the truth and walking away, knowing I'd said everything that needed to be said the morning of my discharge. The sky outside my window was the color of slate, the kind that promised rain by afternoon. My bag was already packed when the nurse came in with my chart. "You're all set," she said, her tone light. I reached into the drawer of the bedside table and pulled out the sealed envelope. "Could I ask you a favor?" I explained that my daughter was coming later, that I wanted this left on the bed. Exactly where I'd been lying for the past week. The nurse studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "I'll make sure she gets it." By 2:00, I was settled in a cafe across the street, my coffee cooling untouched in front of me. Natalie had offered to drive me home, but I'd asked her to give me a little time. I wanted to be close enough to see, but far enough not to be seen. At exactly 3:15, Cambria's car pulled into the hospital lot. from my window seat. I watched her get out, adjusting her hair in the reflection of the glass door before walking inside. She moved quickly, as if she had somewhere else to be after this brief stop. 15 minutes later, the nurse who'd promised to help me called my cell. She came, she said, found the letter on the bed. At first she smiled. But, halfway through, the color drained right out of her face, hands shaking. She didn't say a word when she left. I thanked her, my fingers tight around the phone. I hadn't expected tears or apologies, and I certainly hadn't expected anger. But hearing the reaction secondhand was enough to confirm what I already knew. The words had landed, outside. The first drops of rain began to hit the cafe window, soft and deliberate, like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence I'd been writing for decades. I finished my coffee, pushed the cup aside, and turned my thoughts toward where I would spend the next chapter of my life. Mrs. Delaney insisted I stay with her after the hospital, and for 2 weeks her guest room became my refuge. Her home was quiet, pet-free, and full of small kindnesses. Fresh towels folded at the end of the bed, tea waiting in the kitchen when I woke. She never asked for details unless I offered them, and somehow that space to breathe made it easier to heal when I was strong enough. I moved into a new apartment across town. It was on the top floor of a small brick building, with windows that opened to clean air and not a trace of dander in sight. Unpacking felt different this time. I wasn't just arranging furniture. I was building a life that no longer revolved around being available for someone who didn't show up. I kept in touch with Cambria, but barely. A text on holidays, the occasional short call. The ache for her approval that had once dictated my every move began to loosen its hold. In its place came something steadier, acceptance. New connections grew naturally. Natalie stopped by with takeout on Fridays, and the couple down the hall invited me for dinner after seeing me struggle with a heavy box. Mrs. Delaney called every Sunday, her voice as warm as the daisies she'd brought to my hospital room. It wasn't the picture-perfect family I'd once imagined, but it was real. These were people who showed up without being asked, who offered care without keeping score. And somewhere between the quiet mornings in my new kitchen and the laughter shared over takeout containers, I understood that family isn't defined by who you're born to. It's defined by who chooses to stay, to